Welcome to COIQ, a first-of-its-kind video program about health innovators, early adopters, and influencers, and their stories about riding the roller coaster of healthcare innovation. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy, founder of Legacy DNA Marketing Group, and it's time to raise our COIQ. We're back with another interesting episode with Dr. Kate Wolling. She is the CEO and co-founder of Scale Down, a digital behavioral health innovation that has successfully eliminated all of the fitness devices in the graveyard drawer and was successfully sold to Anthem in November of last year. Welcome to the show, Kate.
Thank you.
So I would like to have you start off by just giving the audience a little bit of background information about you and what you do to just kick us off.
Sure. So I started my career as an academic medical center researcher. So wrote NIH grants and got funded to run studies, largely looking at the role of lifestyle behaviors in chronic disease prevention and chronic disease management. So when I started in the field, a long time ago and had a lot less gray hair. We did that through face-to-face encounters, through group workshops. We gave people binders full of papers. We would supplement that with telephonic support. And over time, as digital became more prominent and more accessible, started moving into using digital strategies. So obviously early on, that could be just an expansion of the role of the telephonic coaching, evolving into using the web, into using the telephone in a more scalable way through IVR, and then obviously into text messaging and the opportunity to use apps. And the thing that I noticed over time in that space was that a lot of these interventions that had been developed by some of my favorite colleagues and peers in the field was that these programs would be found to work in a clinical trial. They would get published, and that was kind of the end of the road. And I found that really personally dissatisfying in my own work, but also sort of just frustrating as a scientist, because of course our goal is to create things that work, but that then move on and really help people. And so started kind of paying more attention to the scalability and realized that sort of these worlds of the commercial, particularly around digital and academic, were existing sort of in parallel and disconnected from each other, and wanted to find a way to bridge them. And so a much, much longer story made short. Some of my favorite colleagues had just finished a clinical trial of an intervention for weight management that they thought had scalability potential, and I thought had enormous scalability potential. And so we started incubating that idea as a nights and weekends project of, how would this concept look if it existed in the real world? And sort of really from the ground up built that over some very late nights and very tired people. And ultimately that became Scale Down. And so when it reached a point of really being a viable business, I left my academic job and became the CEO of the company. And grew it over the intervening few years until we met the wonderful folks at Anthem, and they took it off our hands.
So what was it like for you riding this crazy ride of roller coaster healthcare innovation? The interesting thing about it is there are so many, as much as I sort of now spend my time drawing distinctions between academia and the commercial world, a lot of the skills that I learned as an academic really served me well in the commercial world. So as an academic, we're always doing what we call a pilot, which the commercial world would call an MVP. And we're doing a lot of testing and iterating through that, both through quantitative and qualitative research. So, doing focus groups and having conversations with people in the community, because we do a lot of community-based research in my world. It's usability testing and, and so, those elements felt very familiar to me. I think one of the things maybe people don't realize about being an academic researcher is that, I had to fund 98% of my salary and all of my staff through grants. So I spent a lot of time hustling and trying to convince a whole bunch of other people the work I wanted to do was worth funding. And as an academic, that, that's the peer review process at NIH or other funding agencies. And again, you're just like, as a startup founder who's going to raise capital, which we didn't end up doing at Scale Down, but had a lot of conversations around it. You're trying to convince someone that your idea, balances that space between innovative enough that, you are doing something novel and can own some sort of space, and not so outlandish and risky that you have, and you're unlikely to be successful, whatever successful means. And so, those things were very familiar to me. I would say, that said, there are some cushions and some infrastructures and supports that exist in academia that were not in place as a startup founder, right? So I was HR and finance and janitor and everything else. And that was, it's sort of, you get really good as an academic at being outstanding at your specialty, and that's how you succeed. And you have to get really comfortable as a startup founder with being good enough at a lot of things, but also not losing track of what your secret sauce and specialty is. And so that, I think, was one of the really interesting parts of the journey for me.
I don't think I realized that you were raising your own money through grants to support your initiatives.
Yeah. So most of what you read in peer-reviewed literature is NIH funded. So kind of in the, or, equivalent agencies in Canada and Europe. And it just sort of depends on which institution you're at. But, the extent to which someone is supported by the institution versus supported by grants, and there's a wide range. It depends how much teaching responsibilities you have and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But most research that comes out of academia is funded through a peer review process. And then it also has to go through another peer review process to get published in the literature.
Sure.
So, it really is a level of scrutiny that I place a high level of value on, and really is why I think we should pay attention to the innovations that have been found to be successful in academic science, as really being a great way to point industry in directions that are worth going in, right? Because, as an example, we've been, just last week was at the Society of Behavioral Medicine, which is the place for folks who do behavior change research to convene. And just, thousands of, abstracts and sessions and information of people testing questions and being able to answer some of the very questions that I know entrepreneurs are struggling with in their product development and value proposition life cycle. These answers are out there in a lot of cases. People have spent 30 years understanding, what works for weight loss and self-monitoring and core strategies. There's a lot to be learned, and you don't have to go reinvent the wheel. And there's lots still left to be learned, right? And then that's the flip side of it is, academic interventions are often done in a, couple hundred people for a large study. And one of the things I found in the Scale Down experience was, there are things that you don't find out don't work in your product or don't work how you intended until you start getting thousands of users. And so that's been fun for me to now go back. And I had the really great experience of talking to some remarkable doctoral students a couple weeks ago about, some of those things that you only learn when you start working at scale. And some trade-offs you have to make, right? Because, sometimes you have to, you have to go with 80% of the effect because it allows you to reach, 10x number of people and
right.
choices.
I think you unknowingly just endorsed my peer-reviewed article on what strategies health innovators use to commercialize their innovation. Thank you for that. I owe you one. So what were you thinking as you were contemplating the decision between staying in academia, which sounds like where you were for most of your career, to moving into this world of entrepreneurship? What was running through your mind?
Scalability and impact, really. It's sort of, it was a total unknown for me. I literally, my first job out of college was working on research trials and NIH funded work at an academic medical center. I never really thought I would do anything else. But I had a really unique and wonderful experience of getting invited to go on a national television show and talk about the research that links obesity and cancer risk. And, was really excited to, as a scientist, right, you want to get good information out there. And I can write all the papers in the world, but a national television show lands in the living room of a lot of people, and getting to share that information was a really wonderful opportunity. And I was really excited about it.
And Dr. Oz show's not too bad.
Well, it depends who you ask these days, but that said, the opportunity to present, right, the opportunity to present good science to a lot of people is a wonderful one. And I, have nothing but lovely things to say about that opportunity. And of course, my parents were thrilled about this, right? Because for the first time they could actually explain to people what I did in some way, shape, or form. And so the episode aired, my parents had friends over for like a viewing party.
Oh, that's awesome.
Lovely. And it's really a gift to have parents who are so supportive. And my dad called me up afterwards and said, I didn't know obesity caused cancer. And it was, sort of this moment of, Dad, like, this is what I've been doing for years, like a decade, and so it sort of was this moment of, I went into this field because I wanted to help people and make them healthy and have an impact. And am I having the impact I want to have and thought I was having if my own dad doesn't know that there's a link between the two things I spend most of my time thinking about?
Right.
And so it really sort of pushed me to think about how, really that fundamental trade-off. If I could spend my career doing these studies to refine this question in groups of a couple hundred people. And at the time, I left academia. I had just wrapped up being the lead investigator at one of the sites of a multi-site, large clinical trial that was examining the role of weight loss in preventing breast cancer recurrence and mortality in women who'd been diagnosed with breast cancer. Like there are many wonderful and worthy causes and questions to ask, and that certainly ranked very high for me, right? Because preventing a cancer recurrence and preventing death are fundamentally what I got into the field to do. And I sort of thought, okay, like we had several hundred people go through this study and benefit from our intervention, which was effective and added to the literature. But that's kind of like as big as it gets. And so you do that a handful of times over your career, and that's great. And it, if had that been my entire career, I certainly, would not have felt like I didn't add something in my time on earth.
Sure.
But, the opportunity to then turn around and say, okay, at scale down, we reached, tens of thousands, actually well over 100,000 people, in our very short time of operating that business, that is just impacted a different scale. And those people, they may not have been, facing a cancer recurrence. And it's just sort of everything is about sort of how do I wake up each day and feel like the thing I'm going to go work on matters in the world. That's the great thing about healthcare entrepreneurs is that's the question they wake up every day wanting to answer is how do I do something that matters in this world?
Yeah. So as you thought about what entrepreneurship was going to be like, right? When you're at that crossroad, right?
What didn't I know?
What did you think it was going to be? And then how was it different?
I thought it was going to be a failure, right? Because I'm a data scientist as well. And, I looked at the numbers. I'm like, well, most startups fail. And healthcare is really hard. And I just sort of was like, well, and so I didn't want to do it for the longest time, right? I sort of knew I wanted to do something and I was struggling with it. And I would come home and I would just be like, I'm so frustrated. Like, is what I'm doing matters? And my husband, who thank God is not in healthcare, was like, just go do something, right? And his family comes from a long line of folks who are risk takers and entrepreneurs. And
And, and he was just sort of like, just go do it already. And I was like, but what if it fails? Right. Like I mean, really, it's funny to be an entrepreneur and say that you're not a risk taker, but I'm not. I am very, very calculated in the risks I take. Ultimately his response was just like, so what? If it fails, you'll do something else. Like, so what? Stop talking about it. Go do it. And I really am like a very action-oriented person. And so I don't think I ever could have done it without his.
Yeah, that had to make a big difference.
Yeah. I mean, it's just unconditional support. And then the other side of it is, I launched Scale Down with two wonderful, remarkable, outstanding colleagues. And so, I knew I was going into this with people who really got the science and got what we were trying to do. And one of my two co-founders had previously launched a startup, had a very successful exit, and is just, he drove that whole strategy and execution. And so he knew what he was doing. So even though I was going to be the person day to day, I knew I had this great combination of people who understood entrepreneurship and people who understood the science behind me. And so that made taking the leap easier.
Yeah. I mean, you're so right. Commercializing an innovation and in the industry is really difficult. It's even more so in healthcare. There's this stat that really wrapped all of my doctoral work that 95% of innovations brought to market fail to reach an adequate level of customer acceptance or profitability. And so really that's actually the whole premise for this show is to be able to share stories like yours, to be able to help more people be successfal. So how did you beat the odds?
The hard part I think about it is, I had plenty of conversations along the way of talking to people in the healthcare space. We were in weight management, right? 70% of the population is overweight or obese. It's probably easier to list conditions that obesity is not related to than to list the myriad conditions that it is. And I remember sitting down with an executive at a payer and, and this person was just, lovely in being, kind as can be and very transparent, right? And the thing that in entrepreneur is sometimes the hardest thing to get is a no. You're just kind of left dangling.
Yeah.
And this person, said to me, like, look, Kate, like obesity is a huge problem, no pun intended. We get it. We believe it. But, it is not the problem we're trying to solve right now. Like the thing that is driving our financial situation is readmissions. And, and then I had, similar conversation with someone else who said, you know what, look, like we know this is a problem for our members, but the ROI for weight loss in the, economic models, and thank you, Eric Finkelstein, for doing that work, because it's really great that we have these academics who do this great science, happens at around 24 months, maybe later, 24 to 36. And the average time that someone is in our plan is 18 to 24 months. So we're not going to realize the ROI that comes from investing in weight loss. So while we know it's a problem, like it's not going to drive enough on the financial side for us. And like, that's the really like interesting thing is that people are out there solving real problems as healthcare entrepreneurs. But figuring out like the business model and the product market fit is the hard part. And that's like, that to me is interesting tension. And having come out of academia is academics don't have to think about that. They don't have to figure out who's going to pay for this and where does it fit within like the landscape. And it's actually fascinating how many people really don't understand the business models that are in healthcare. Like they're bizarre, right? Most people, if you're not getting your healthcare coverage from Medicaid or Medicare, you're getting it from a self-insured employer in most cases. And, people are like, no, I have Blue Cross Blue Shield. Your employer is paying for that, so it's a really interesting, set of things as someone who had spent all of these years ostensibly in healthcare, that all of that was a learning curve for me to really understand the incentives and the business decisions that go into deciding that something is worth spending time on. And not just, I guess that's a bad way of saying it, that because there's an opportunity cost to where you spend your time.
Sure.
So that this is worth doing over the other things that I could be doing.
The priority.
Yeah. And so I'd love to tell you that like I had it all figured out when I quit my job and launched the startup, and don't tell my dad I didn't.
Right.
Just you think of it, actually, it was even crazier. I have a friend who says I shouldn't call it luck because it was more than that, but an opportunity presented itself and we were positioned to take advantage of it and did. And that opportunity was a unique one in that we were offered the opportunity to work with a pharmaceutical company as what I now would call like a beyond the pill or behavioral wraparound solution. And I'll be honest, like when we were sketching out the idea for this product, that was a business model opportunity was not on my radar at all. But when they called, we answered and, went down that path. And so I think, there is something to seeing that an opportunity exists and being prepared to pursue it.
So you mentioned the pharmaceutical company. So how did that lead to the buyout by Anthem?
Not directly.
Okay.
So, it allowed us to really build a product that executed well at scale. So it was a really unique partnership. They took a chance on us that I think is maybe starting to become more common, but certainly was not at the time we executed that deal. And we're very collaborative, right? So, there were kinks in they thought, I remember the conversation still to this day so clearly because the woman on their marketing team was just a blast to work with. And I remember, Kim saying to me, this is a new business model for us. We think we're probably going to maybe send you 10,000 people in the first year, right? And as a startup, you're like, yes.
Right. We won.
And then, turns out Kim is phenomenal at her job. And their sales and marketing team crushed it. And they sent us 10,000 people in the first 3 months.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And I, and we were on the phone like every couple days, like, how are we going to navigate this? Like, what are the ways we can, like, we just need the patients to have a great experience. So what are you going to do? And what are we going to do? And it was, lovely collaboration. And I remember just one day, they were like, well, so now we've got this issue and like, this is great because it means people are using it and they're buying it. And this is a great problem to have. And she just goes, when everyone stops saying that, it's still a problem, right? And like that, I was like, thank you, because that's how I feel, right? It's sort of this really unique experience. But, that meant that we found all of the bugs in what we had built really quickly. Iterated and figured out, like, this is not a solution that can be solved with people when you have that many users on your platform. We've got to re-engineer this feature and this function. And, and so that allowed us to really gather a lot of data on what was working very, very quickly. And so, we had that partnership and that really put us in a position to have a well-tested, both in the academic research that was foundational to what we, our approach, and then in the execution. And so when we ended up then getting introduced to Anthem about, maybe could we work together and partner with some of the telephonic coaches that they had and were trying to solve, I think it de-risked for Anthem that partnership that ultimately became, the acquisition. A
lot of legitimacy and credibility was established with that partnership. Yeah,
exactly. Just because that partnership gave us, evidence of being able to execute at scale. So, Scale Down was took a connected scale and put a digital health software solution on top of it. And, we understood the logistics of scales and had, tested different scale models and how do you deliver them and how do you onboard people and how does it work if you live in rural Alabama versus downtown Chicago and things need to work differently. And does it matter if someone has, this cell phone service provider versus this cell phone service provider? And I think that I think my hypothesis would be, it gave them confidence that this was something they could roll out to their very diverse and broad membership base with confidence.
So there's a lot of innovators that have amazing technology that really struggle with adoption and engagement. It sound, and to hear your story with over 100, almost 150,000 users, what was the big decision that was made, or was it, this partnership, or was there something else to it?
It's funny. We built something that from the outside looks incredibly simple. And that was by design. Now, of course, behind the scenes, it was not incredibly simple, but there was no app. Scale Down was a text message based program, and that was by design, because it meant that we could reach anyone. You didn't, at the time, smartphone adoption continues to rise. But at the time, particularly in certain sociodemographic groups, it didn't have that penetration. And even among people who have a smartphone, there's still not a great penetration of willingness to use apps, and willingness to use apps regularly. And so the challenge, of course, with messaging through apps is I have to open the app to get the message, or I have to agree without knowing what's coming my way to app messaging. And so, we made a conscious choice to build this whole platform through text messaging. And that meant folks who had a flip phone could still engage with our program, which is, and because when we asked people to text back, we designed it that the answers they gave back could still be done with like a flip phone keypad, right? You didn't have to send a long sentence.
Okay.
We used a smart scale that was a cellular chip. So most people know like connected devices, but for folks who maybe aren't in the space, right? Like you could have a Bluetooth or Wi-Fi chip, or you could have a cellular chip. And it costs more to do a cellular chip, and it's a little bit more of a complicated back-end logistics system and setup. But what we found was we were trying to reach a population that had a pretty diverse set of experiences, interests, and trust of digital health. And we were working in a space where people need to have a high degree of self-efficacy to be successful.
Yep.
And so if it takes me 20 minutes to pair the device that you have sent me to my account to have my first positive engagement with you, I do not feel set up for success. And that is frustrating and not a great user experience.
Sure.
It is really different. When you use a cellular scale, you can actually pair the scale to the user's account before it leaves the warehouse. So our users would get the scale in the mail. They would open the box, take the scale out of the box, step on the scale, and get a text message. No device. So for people who are, not familiar with technology or don't feel competent with technology, that is an incredibly delightful experience. And so when we looked at our data, what we actually found is that older adults were just as successful as those in the 20 to 30-year-old digital generation. So that things like that, I didn't necessarily anticipate would happen. We were really delighted to see in our data. And I think that allows you to walk into someone like Anthem and say, this is not just for your millennials that are on your plan. This will work for everyone. And that that de-risks the investment for them.
So was that a strategic decision that you and your partners and in the team, commercialization decision that you made, that the user experience as it relates to that ease of use was something that was a real top priority for you all?
It was. And I think, in some ways that probably comes out of the fact that our founding team have all spent our careers working in a lot of medically underserved populations. And so, our take is always sort of look, it's easy to help healthy, wealthy, and white people do things. But, all of us, but particularly my one co-founder, has really devoted his entire career to reaching people that no one else is reaching, are not successful with traditional programs. And so the idea is sort of, if you can succeed with the hard to reach, then you build, that's the place to start and build up from. And I think, the difference, and that's probably a really fundamental difference between what gets built by some, academics and what gets built in the commercial space. Because, sometimes what happens in the commercial space is
someone has a great experience individually and they say, this is what worked for me, and I'm going to build a whole product and business around it. And they find those first 5 users, right? It's that crossing the chasm issue. You find those first 5 early adopters and you can't get the next 50. And so I think that's different than taking some concepts and the work and the experiences that come from working in underserved populations and saying, this is what works there, and now I'm going to offer it to the easy to reach people.
Yeah, that's a really interesting approach.
Right, but
Yeah, that's really interesting. So there's this explosion of innovation taking place in healthcare, right? Obviously, we all know that. And so one of the things that I hear health innovators talk about is there's so much noise, right? There's so much innovation, there's so much change and opportunity. How do I rise above the noise? So I pose that question to you. How did you rise above the noise?
Evidence. Our pharma partners found us because of the published work that my colleagues had done. And I know their market research had told them that would be valuable. I was surprised and impressed by how important and how valuable that was in the marketplace. Initially, their sales team was not going out and talking about us and our science. And ultimately, they came back and their salespeople, there's all kinds of regulations around the pharmaceutical industry that I have a deep appreciation for now, having had that partnership and their patience with educating me about it. But ultimately, their team was taking shrink wrapped PDFs of some of the science that our team had done, around the foundational concepts behind our product. And going in and saying hey doc, you might not know that daily weighing is a really effective weight loss strategy. Here's the science behind daily weighing. When you use our drug, your members get access to a daily weighing program. Wow. Right. And and it was, I think that is, again, I give the pharmaceutical company a lot of credit for valuing the behavioral science as much as the drug. They invest a lot of money in drug development.
Absolutely.
But they really, I think it is, it's not, and that was happening well before Jim Madeira of the AMA started talking about digital snake oil, well before, the digital therapeutic route existed with the FDA. And so, to me, that just says evidence-based digital health is not going away, right? It's just going to become more important. And I think, that doesn't always have to mean a randomized clinical trial. But I do think there is a skepticism, healthy skepticism about the claims that people make around digital health that need to be investigated, because I think it's particularly in the mental health space. If someone is using an app, there's sort of this trade-off, right? They may be using that app at the expense of going to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And while I love the idea of digital health being able to provide reach, if someone is using something that does not work in place of something we know does, there's a risk there. And so I think evidence is what helps people de-risk.
So let me ask you this. So a lot of the health innovators that I work with know that they need to do a pilot because they need to have some type of data to demonstrate safety and efficacy. How would you compare what the average health innovator is doing with a pilot or 2 pilots with a potential buyer versus what you were doing in academia? Would you say that was really the same, that they're kind of pulling the same data, or is maybe part of your success that you had more credibility because you were researchers, or that you kind of knew what data to collect or how to present the data? Help me understand that.
I think there probably are health innovators who are doing high quality trials. I think the challenge, if you're on the buyer side, right, if you put yourself in the seat of a pharmaceutical company looking at partnerships or a payer, you know, I need to be able to trust that you haven't manipulated data. And the upside of this peer-reviewed process that our team had gone through is that there was an adjudication of the process and the quality. And so I think take another company that I have a lot of admiration for, Omada Health took an evidence-based protocol. They turned it into a digital solution that they made scalable, but then they went through the process of, they really have done a remarkable job of investing in scientists and science, putting their data out there for scrutiny. And I think that's the difference. I think it's different for me to walk in with a sales deck that says, 35% of people were successful in this outcome, right? In our sample, right? And I don't know if that's a sample of 5 or a sample of 5,000. I think it's really different to say, here's, we did this study and actually, open yourself up to some scrutiny of the data in a different way. And I think that's kind of this spectrum that we're in right now of digital health is like that's the intent of the digital therapeutic review process, right? Is there's an adjudication of the methods for data collection and analysis that gives people confidence. I think the question is, for things that have a lower risk profile, what's the next, where does that sit in the spectrum?
Yeah. So the last question I have for you before we wrap it up and then open it up to the live Q&A. And if anyone is out there listening and you want to be a part of that, just email me at Dr. Roxy at drroxy.com, and you can get on our invite list. The last question that I have is, there are so many healthcare innovators that are in the trenches right now. What advice do you give them?
Academics are your friend. There is, we just published a paper on sort of the history and future of digital health with some colleagues. And I posted about it on my LinkedIn or Twitter or something. And someone pinged me and was like, I can't get behind the paywall to get access, right? Because so many journal articles are behind a paywall. And I was like, just, if you ever want a paper, just ask someone, like happy to send it to you, right? And everyone else I know is too. Like academics are actually like largely accessible, particularly if you want them to go on about their science. Look at me on stop our whole time, right? And so I think it's if you want to know about their science, they're, no one I know is unwilling to share a paper, answer a question. And I think also they're available for collaboration a lot. So certainly everyone's time is valuable. Don't ask them to give you your time for free. Just like academic friends, don't ask a startup to give you things for free because they don't have any money. But, I think there are a lot more opportunities for collaboration between the two, right? You don't have to become a world-class scientist as a startup founder. You just need to find one to work with, right? Like, literally earlier this week sat down and chatted with a startup about like, how do you bring behavioral science into what you are doing in your digital health program? They don't have the ability to hire someone like me full time, but I'm happy to come in and talk with you about what works.
That's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. So I want to give you one opportunity to, before we wrap up, to say what projects are you working on right now, and then how can people reach you?
I think I'm most excited about comes out of being with the academic community and the scientific community last week is, there are a lot of folks who are training in those academic programs that I came out of, like when I came out of, who want to connect with industry. And they don't know how, right? Like their advisor can tell them how to write an academic CV and how to write an NIH grant, but, they're looking for, digital health companies who want to bring this skill set in. And I know there are so many digital health companies that want to bring that skill set in. And so, I'm really excited about trying to figure out a way to bridge that and bring those communities together because I think they would
both just gained such benefit from it. So I'm really excited about trying to do some work in that space.
That would be immensely valuable. Do it. So how can our audience get a hold of you if they have any additional questions?
Oh, I'm on the Twitter
Okay.
at Dr. Kate Wolin. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of the show.
My pleasure.
What's the difference between launching and commercializing a healthcare innovation? Many people will launch a new product. Few will commercialize it. To learn the difference between launch and commercialization and to watch past episodes of the show, head to our video show page at drroxy.com. Thanks so much for watching and listening to the show. You can subscribe to the latest episodes on your favorite podcast app, like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or subscribe to the video episodes on our YouTube channel. No matter the platform, just search COIQ with Dr. Roxy. Until next time, let's raise our COIQ.